What's good, YouTube? Steel here, and today's video is a little different, at least from what I had planned initially. It is kind of adjacent to like my meta reports or like card breakdowns. As you can see in the title, I'm discussing red card and or Mars and when to use it or how to use it, or pretty much give you a guide to the best of my ability, because at the end of the day it's pretty subjective, and also it's very like luck based. Clearly you can't control what Mars gives them or what red card gives them. Like, they still might get that Cyrus off that one card off of Mars. You might red card them and they still see like rare candy, Charizard. So like, obviously these cards aren't guarantees. However, something that has come up not only in my live streams but in my comment section as well is when to use red card, or I don't want to play red card because like I don't know when to use it, which is pretty much like the most common question or the most common thing when it comes to this card, to the point where in the moment I didn't even know how to answer the question. So I actually like took time to like, I guess, reflect or think about like how I choose to use it. This isn't like an end all be all like set in stone how to use the card, because at the end of the day there's a lot of things that go into it, from matchups to just like straight feeling to do they seem like they don't have the right cards, or they break. Because like sometimes they'll be at 5 cards and you just don't Mars them because they're not really doing anything. We'll get into that. But before we begin, if you enjoy this style of video, I could keep on like rolling them out this way, more of like a discussion slash of like presentation, not only on like the meta but certain cards or strategies. As always, we post everything Pokemon Pocket here, from expert solo battle guides to master ball level gameplay. So please consider subscribing, as well as follow me on Twitch. The link will be down in the description. I'm streaming currently from Mondays to Friday, late in the night for me, 11 p.m. Eastern to like around 2-3 a.m. in the morning. I think that's all I gotta say. Let's get right into how to use red card. So as you can see here, funny enough, I took the time to make a little presentation, or at least a visual, that help y'all figure out the art of Mars, or basically the art of red card. They're essentially the same card, especially in the early game. But one thing, like I mentioned in the intro, not many people feel comfortable using it. I don't think it's a skill gap. I don't think you're any better or worse because of knowing how to use Mars or red card. At the end of the day, it's all like chance and probabilities that you're trying to play with. Statistically, if they have a 5-card hand and you put it down to 3, the chances that they have the exact cards they need become lower. And late game Mars burning down to 1 is one of like the most broken plays that Triumphant Light had. But yeah, basically, welcome to how to use red card. Although disclaimer, I think it matters, and I have to point out that this video is recorded and being posted during the extra dimensional crisis format. That's to say that if you see this video way into the future, like 2 or 3 sets later, the reasoning or the math or ideas behind red card or Mars, or how relevant they are, might drop, or they might be exactly the same. You never know. But just in case, I feel like it's required to say, because as we look at Genetic Apex, Mythical Island, and Space Time Showdown, Smackdown, when those sets came out, literally the takes on red card was just like, I put it right there, LOL, card sucks. The card was terrible. There was like, the only deck that was really using it was 18 trainers, and it's mainly because they wanted to play 18 trainers and they had to fill the deck out somehow. We were only 3 sets in, so it wasn't like you had many options on what else you would play. And when Mars first came out, realistically, I always do a pack opening. Like, I max out my my Pokegold, and I open packs for the channel for either content creation or just to have cards. I'm a fiend. I'm a whale. I have all the cards basically, and I try to go for high rarity. And I pulled my playset of Mars day 1 of Space Time Smackdown, and honestly I was disappointed at the time. I was like, this could have been Cyrus's. And honestly, it wasn't until like Triumphant Light where I was like, wait a minute, I have a playset of full art Mars. Because when we looked at Triumphant Light meta, we now see that red card still sucks, because putting your opponent's hand to 3 was never really that impactful. When you're thinking of like what the top deck was, is Darkrai Giratina, that more often than not was putting their entire hand on the board. Rather, the hand size during these formats, as well as the formats in before it, your hand size was never too big, right? You would always be 3 at max 4. And would you really go down 1 card to put them down 1 card? That's why these felt, especially Mars at the time of its release, using your supporter card just to put your opponent's hand down to 1 kind of fell off, kind of didn't feel worth it. But when we entered Triumphant Light format, where Darkrai Giratina was everywhere, the deck that was using it the best was actually Darkrai Giratina. Once you would knock out their Darkrai or their Giratina, they would go down to you. They would obviously get 2 points. Thus, the Mars would bring them down to 1. So in the mirror match, honestly, Mars felt like one of the best cards in the game. As yes, they would take the knockout, but then you bring them down to 1 card. And if that 1 card or 2 when they draw for turn wasn't like that Sabrina or that Cyrus or the red to let them knock out your final Pokemon, you basically checkmated them with Mars the turn before. This might be a whole bunch of words that don't make sense, but quite frankly, none of what I'm saying currently matters, because again, I'm talking about past formats, and we are currently now in extra dimensional crisis, where red card and Mars have completely different meanings. Because in Shining Revelry, which I did not make a slide for, which I should have made a slide for, is when Mars and red card really took off, because thanks to rare candy, a lot of decks were popping off just turn 1, trying to search as much as possible, to then the following turn when they could finally evolve, use their rare candy, and just there was decks like Stoke Charizard, stuff like Greninja, Garchomp, like Rampardos, that if they saw that rare candy turn 2, you were basically donezo. So that's why Mars and red card, although they can't guarantee to get it out their hand, it was statistically better to drop them back down to 3 cards or less in the case of Mars sometimes, for that chance or that slight any inkling of a chance to just like not get wrecked turn 2. That's like the main idea. So let's go right into the pros and cons of red card and Mars. Like basically the pro of red card is obviously that's an item card. It could be used alongside a supporter. So turn 1, you're able to research into red card, which is something that Mars obviously can't do. It manipulates the opponent's hands, usually resulting in less cards. You never really use red card when they have 3 cards in hand. Or less. Obviously, you don't want to give them more cards either. So it's safe to say when you're using red card, it's to reduce their hand size, and it randomizes their hand, thus you can disrupt them. However, the cons is that it always shuffles to 3. So there's times where if they don't go under 3 cards or they're under 3 cards, the card doesn't really work anymore. Especially in the late game, they're once they played so many resources, their hand isn't as large. So red card kind of feels redundant, as well as randomizing the hand can also just help them. That's like the pro is also a con. The same goes for Mars. However, Mars has that extra ability where late in the games, it could technically be just a checkmate where you drop your opponent's hand to 1 card. And if it's not the exact card they need or the exact combo of cards they need, which is, again, statistically, you're playing your odds that it'll be less likely. Well, it'll definitely be less likely if they only have 2 cards to their 4 or 5 cards in hand. Thus making it where maybe an over-aggressive play the turn before is completely like okay, because Mars made it where punishment for said play is like less likely. And then a clear con is that it is a supporter card, so it's one of those that you can't use early. Like if you go so you have to either choose between research and Mars sometimes, and that's kind of rough. In decks where research is very, very necessary, I would suggest playing red card, which we'll get more into detail on the next slides. And with that, let's get to the main question that's always asked, whether it's on my live stream, whether it's on my YouTube comments, whether it's on other people's live streams or YouTube comments, and it's when do I red card? This isn't by no means like a definitive, oh, you can follow this 100% of the time. There's no other way to do this. Red card and Mars, or Pokemon Pocket in general, has infinite lines, although it's a very small game with like 20 card decks, and most strategies are pretty streamlined. When it comes to decision making, what separates the casual player from a top player is some of the decision making, or how seriously they take like every like micromanaged action. However, created this flowchart to give you a pretty standard way of like looking at it, or at least having a base knowledge of how to approach using Mars or red card. And in this case, we'll start with the simple question of, do I red card is the opponent on a stage 2 deck? If the answer is no, we could pretty much assume that they're either on Buzzwole or Darkrai Giratina. And again, this is Extra Dimensional Crisis format, so maybe in the future there's other decks that are just basic Pokemon. And in this current format, that's usually leaning towards Buzzwole and Darkrai Giratina. So once we have that established, we could go on to the next question, which is, do they have their board setup? And by board setup, if you're talking about Buzzwole, that means they have their Celesteela, their Buzzwole, and then one of their 1 prizes up front, whether it's Pheromosa, whether it's Kartana. Although sometimes, depending on the deck you're playing, just Celesteela and Buzzwole is enough of a setup board for them, as you could imagine. And in the terms of Darkrai Giratina, it's any board where they have Darkrai and Giratina already on the board, regardless of who's in the active, regardless of who's getting charged. And I guess I should have started from the beginning with this, but do I red card starts with, do they have more than 3 cards in hand? If they're at 3 cards in hand, we usually don't do it, especially on this side of the formula. If they're playing these Darkrai's, if it's against Darkrai or Buzzwole, we're never red carding or Mars when they're at 3 cards, if it's just going to give them 3 cards back. However, if they're at 4 or more and they already have their board set up or their ideal like Pokemon on board, yes, we red card them, or Mars. If you don't have a different supporter to use, like if you have a better card to use, like either Professor or maybe a Guzma because they have a tool, then you don't use the Mars. But in the case where that's the only supporter you have, you would do it in that situation. But let's say they don't have their board set up. If they haven't used Professor's Research, then we would hold off on using the red card because it's very likely that they've bricked. One thing that Buzzwole does do a little different is that they might be holding the Buzzwole in hand. So don't think that Celesteela on board means that they don't have Buzzwole. What could determine that they're bricked is if the Celesteela is not on board, because Celesteela is the type of Pokemon that they require or they want to have on board, but they don't care for it in the sense of like, if you start hitting it early, the damage doesn't really affect their game plan. So if you see a board without Celesteela, it's more likely that they bricked than a board without Buzzwole. And back to the initial question of have they used Professor's Research and Pokeball? If they have done it and they don't have a board set up, you definitely use your red card and or Mars, as the cards you're giving them won't include cards that thin out the deck. Thus, it's very likely that even if they start seeing things that might be useful, they're going to be stuck with only 1 action a turn or even less. And now looking back to the other side, let's start all the way at the top again. Is the opponent on a stage 2 deck? If the answer is yes, then you have to ask yourself, can they evolve the next turn? What I mean by can they evolve the next turn is if I'm going first, I'm starting the game and I have red card or Mars, and I see that they're on an evolution deck, whether it's Charmander, whether it's Savali, whether it's, I guess, anything with Greninja, anything with Rampardos, Solgaleo, Magnezone, Shiinotic, those type of cards, but they can't evolve any of them the following turn, the answer would be no. Thus, you wait before you could red card, aka you just red card the following turn, which obviously takes you back to the initial question of can they evolve next turn. If the answer is yes, like let's say you're going second, their turn one was just putting their Charmander or their Cosmog and passing to you, and like maybe they researched and they have like a 5-card hand or whatever, then we definitely do it. And I want to stress again that this is not the end-all be-all version or strategy on how to use red card or Mars, but as for a beginner or for somebody that's not quite sure, it's a pretty good and pretty simple like way of looking at it that at least gets you started. Through practice is where you're most going to learn whether you want to use it at certain situations. Sometimes you might use it in a situation that you wouldn't normally use it, but it's through like almost like a feeling or a vibe where you're like, I think they have the card they need, and the only win condition we have is if we shuffle it away. And the final question I want to answer is which to run. Another big question that gets asked is, do we play red card or we do play Mars? And it all comes down to which deck you're playing. And this time we flip the question. It's not, is my opponent on a stage 2 deck? It's, are we on a stage 2 deck? And the reason that matters is because stage 2 decks really need to like set up or make sure that they are able to use their Professor's Researches or Ionos or anything that requires you to draw cards. Thus, let's go through that start. Am I playing a stage 2 deck? If the answer is yes, is do you run too many key supporters? And what I mean by that is, are you playing Iono, Research, like cards that you need to see turn 1 to set up, whether it's your rare candy play, whether it's Magnezone, like whatever you're doing. If you're on a stage 2 deck and you run too many key supporters, then, and the answer is yes, then you would play red card, because you want to be able to red card your opponent turn 1 in all the examples that we mentioned previously in the previous slide, but still be able to use your research and or your Ionos, or still dig through your deck with your other supporters. But let's say you don't run that many key, or you're playing like, let's say Solgaleo, which is a deck that even if they find their pieces rather quickly, they don't need to depend so much on speed. Like you need to put 2 energy, like there's a kind of like a pace to it. Then you could just go with Mars. Solgaleo realistically is only playing like Lily to heal, Sabrina and or Cyrus for like knockouts later on, and Research. They're not really on Iono. They're not really dependent on like seeing so much things, because they do play Shiinotic, which is another like search engine or another consistency piece. Thus, you could afford to just play Mars. On the other hand, we have non-stage 2 decks. Once again, we're talking about Buzzwole, Dark Tina, even Guzzlord if you want to like add that to the pile. And then we ask the question, is the 20 card list flexible? And what I mean by that is, nowadays, especially decks like Dark Tina, although Dark Tina from the very beginning has been quite flexible, almost like a toolbox, close to an 18 trainer list, but with just 16 trainers instead. Thus, if the answer to the question is that yes, your deck is flexible, you have a toolbox, my answer is why not both? Then again, on the other hand, is your deck flexible? If the answer is no, where you're playing your Ericas, you're playing Lusamine, you're playing a lot of trainer cards that are specific to the deck you're playing. You're playing like 6 to 7 basic Pokemon, so the 20 card list is, it's rather tight and you have to be selective. That's when you choose one or the other, which is where we lean towards, do you run too many key supporters? Similar to stage 2 decks, if you really need to resolve your research early, or you have Cyrus and Sabrina that you might want to play on the same time that you're playing cards like red card or Mars, then you would lean towards red card, because more often than not, you're going to want to use something alongside it. Otherwise, you just go with Mars. It is the stronger card, because in the early game, Mars is literally a red card. And then in the late game, Mars is just like a god tier card that could just win the game on its own by limiting your opponent's options at the end of the game. Ultimately, I hope this video wasn't too wordy and got my point across. I try to keep it as simple as possible. I do tend to talk quite a bit, especially when I don't have like a script or an idea in mind and I'm just talking and talking like straight from the dome. It kind of like gets lost at some point. So hopefully it was focused enough for y'all to learn something. Hopefully you enjoyed the kind of content. Feel free to let me know either an idea or a point that I brought up that doesn't either align with your ideas, or something that you maybe think I could improve on, or a key point that I didn't consider. As I'm the first to tell you that not only do I not have like every single line of play like to memory, cards like red card and Mars are very subjective on how you want to run them, how you use them, how you feel about when to use them. And I kind of just wanted to make this video to give newer players or just people that aren't sure about how to use it kind of like a baseline or standard to follow and grow upon through their own experience, and hopefully it does just that. Regardless, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy these kind of videos, consider subscribing. And if you're interested in some high-level gameplay, I do stream on Twitch Mondays through Fridays around 11 p.m. Eastern to 2 or 3 a.m. depending on, like, I don't know, I guess how much energy I have. The link to that will be down below. Once again, thanks for watching, and above all else, stay pro.